It's the Believe in Texans podcast brought to you by FanDuel. And every year, Jeremy Fowler does this on ESPN. He polls about 70 executives, NFL coaches, scouts, and personnel people and asks them to rank their top 10 players in various position groups. And I like this a lot more than the NFL top 100 for nerdy reasons that I won't go into, but the balloting process for the NFL top 100, which is voted for by players, it's bogus. Take every positive and negative with a grain of salt. This one I tend to like because we get some anonymous quotes from executives and scouts, etc. But we also get it's a smaller pool that they're ranking, and I feel like it's a little bit more of an informed electorate of people that watch a lot more of the entire league than a lot of players do, and they watch more position groups. So this might come as a huge surprise to some of you, but I'm guessing it won't. Texans defense is heavily represented because all the position groups have been done now. Offense, not so much. So we're going to start off with the defense before we'll get to the offense eventually. But right now on FanDuel, CJ Stroud's over-under for passing touchdowns is 22.5, which is a really interesting and precarious number. If you look at 2023, CJ Stroud had 23 touchdowns. 2024, he had 20 touchdowns. 2025, he had 19 touchdowns. But if you prorate the fact that he missed 3.5 games there, last year would have been on pace for 23 plus touchdowns. I think that given that I expect the offense to improve, by how much, I don't know, but I think it will improve, and it's going to be a better environment for CJ in which to operate. I would take the over on that. That's not me just being wide-eyed and optimistic or anything. I think that's just math, man. You can't argue against the math. But when it comes to guys that made these top 10 lists, as well as honorable mentions and also received votes, defense heavily represented. We'll start with the defensive line because I do have a healthy bias in favor of defensive linemen, especially on this football team. For the edge rushers, Will Anderson came in at number 3 overall. It was Myles Garrett and Micah Parsons above Will. I think that I'm trying not to get too worked up about individual rankings because, like 1 or 2 votes here or there would swing these wildly. I would say that I think as an overall player, I like Will Anderson more than Micah Parsons. One of the issues I have with this is, I like that they call it edge rusher instead of defensive end because then outside linebackers kind of get lost in the shuffle. I would prefer that they say edge defender because when you hear edge rusher, all of a sudden you almost take the run game out of it completely. And Will Anderson is just simply a more physical all-around run/pass defender. If you want to talk about pure pass rush ability, then I get it going with Micah Parsons. I think that just Will is more well-rounded than that. That's neither here nor there. If we go into Will Anderson, highest ranking he got was number 2 overall. Lowest ranking was number 8 overall. He was number 8 last year, so he's risen up in estimation after just an immaculate year that he had this year. But some of the quotes about him, I still feel like he's underrated to a degree. True 3-down force multiplier who demands attention and has the rare ability to elevate the play of his teammates. This stat that I'm about to read to you, I kind of glossed over it the first time, and then it hit home how big it was. When you talk about the ability to elevate the play of your teammates, it was this one. He's credited with causing 43 incompletions in 2025, 6 more than any other pass rusher. So just by virtue of pressuring a quarterback, he created 6 more incompletions than any other defender out there. I myself, as a guy who is not nearly as fast as anybody who's anywhere on these lists, I did always feel like I wish people kept track of that back in the day. They didn't keep track of that type of stuff. They didn't have the GPS data and everything. But I was a beat late getting to the quarterback, but damn it, I forced an incompletion. I think the really interesting one is if you look at forced interceptions, and I haven't seen stats for that anywhere this year. So, but I would imagine that Will might have been pretty high on that too. So that ability to create havoc, whether you're actually getting, credited for a pressure or a sack or a tackle or anything else, I think that's very, very clear. And that obviously elevates the play of his teammates. I mean, they got a good thing going on the defense between the complementary play between the defensive backs and the defensive line. Those guys all make the other units on the defense better. But not a huge surprise here at all, obviously. Anderson led all NFL players in pass rush wins off the edge, 62 pass rush wins off the edge. And the other quote from a separate NFC scout was this: combination of speed to power, then his strength and effort. He's better than I expected, to be honest. Yeah, and I think that's where the scouting reports on Will Anderson, I think, were pretty accurate. I think that because I shared some concern with Will Anderson, just in that he was a very raw pass rusher. He really wasn't very polished. And there are a bunch of guys who get drafted high who have all the physical traits and they've got a lot of production in college, but it's more because they were just so physically dominant, or because, like with Will, he hustled so much. I remember one of the anonymous scout reports about Will Anderson was something at the time of the draft was something like, well, he runs around a lot and makes plays, but that doesn't always translate to the NFL. It's true. That doesn't always translate to the NFL. Where I give the Texans a lot of credit is that DeMeco Ryans and Nick Caserio really believed in the intangibles that Will Anderson has. To the point where some of the intangibles that were reported before the draft almost sounded too good to be true. And then we've seen that, yeah, Will Anderson is kind of too good to be true. But there he is, right in front of our very eyes. The other defensive lineman for the Texans that made this list, the edge rusher, you might guess, wasn't Danico Autry. It was Danielle Hunter. Gosh, that feels like I was throwing shade at Danico Autry. I did not. That's not what I'm intending to do. Danielle Hunter, highest ranking of 2. He ends up finishing 6th overall. So both Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter got votes by at least one person that ranked them the second best player. And that also means that nobody ranked Danielle higher than Will. At least, yeah, right, yeah, okay. It seems like pretty simple math, but it's difficult. It's difficult when you're talking to get the simple math right. He's 31 years old, and as they start off the blurb here, it says this year's voting served as an appreciation of sorts for Hunter's career. Not a major factor in past year's voting. Hunter garnered top 5 votes on more than half the ballots this time around. This is, as J.J. Watt had pointed out before the Texans even signed Danielle Hunter, and I think before even the Texans knew they were going to have a crack at Danielle Hunter, that year in the offseason, J.J. Watt had tweeted out something along the lines of, I don't understand why this guy doesn't get more recognition, if it's just because he's playing in the vast north or whatever it might be up in Minnesota. I think he's a pass rusher's pass rusher. You know, when you think about in any field, there's people who don't have as much popularity or success as people who are actual professionals or other people who are experts in the field think they should. Stand-up comedians are like this. You know, like Norm Macdonald. Norm Macdonald was much more highly regarded in his lifetime by actual comedians than by the public at large. He was never as big or as famous. So I don't know if Danielle would take it as a compliment that I'm calling him the Norm Macdonald of edge rushers, but I mean it as an extreme compliment. As somebody who appreciates stand-up comedians, there's something about Norm Macdonald that for whatever reason the public at large didn't appreciate, but other comedians really appreciated. Guys like J.J. Watt and these other pass rushers will look at Danielle Hunter and just kind of marvel at his plethora of pass rush moves and how polished he is at it. And I think underrated, despite his physique, I think he's a little bit underrated in terms of his physicality. One reason for this, I think, aside from just any kind of bias or his, quiet personality or whatever, is that in Minnesota, they blitzed a lot. So it created a lot of opportunities for Danielle to either be matched up against tight ends or at times unblocked. And I think people kind of checked him down a notch because they felt like, okay, it's not like some of these other guys that are just beating offensive tackles one-on-one all the time. And coming to Houston, look, yes, he's got the benefit of playing opposite Will Anderson, just like Will Anderson has the benefit of playing opposite Danielle Hunter, but there's more opportunities for him to just simply rush the passer. And he's not benefiting from the blitz or anything else. It's just pure pass rush. And he's beaten guys like Penei Sewell with that ridiculous spin move clinic that he put on against Penei Sewell a couple of years ago. One of the quotes about him, one of the best power rushers of all time, which was an interesting one to me because I don't think of him as a power rusher. I think if I think of a power rusher, you think of like Jared Verse. Jared Verse is just bull rush, bull rush, bull rush, bull rush. We're power rusher. To call Danielle Hunter a power rusher, I feel is a little bit of a lesser compliment than he deserves. But it's true that he's not a burn somebody around the edge speed rusher all the time. So I get it. I might not call him a power rusher as much as a well-rounded hybrid pass rusher. He's really freaking good. His 54 sacks over the past 4 seasons ranks second in the NFL behind Myles Garrett. He's a victim of his own consistency. He's just too steady. He's too steadily good all the time that people just don't quite realize. Like, holy crap. Yeah. Oh yeah. Danielle Hunter. He's one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. So somehow I'm finding a way to get offended by these lofty rankings by all of these guys. Another quote by an NFL coordinator about Danielle Hunter. He said, take a look at this guy's career production. There can't be a more underrated, dominant player since I've been in the NFL. His silent tape was unreal. He's a total force. There's a compliment, damn it. That's the way you do it, NFL coordinator. I don't know who you coordinate for, but I appreciate your genuine compliment. Moving back one level in the defense, not another surprise here, Azeez Al-Shaair. A bit of a surprise. If you had asked me a week after the whole Trevor Lawrence incident, if a year later, a little bit over a year and a half later, people were going to be ranking Azeez Al-Shaair as the 6th best linebacker in the league with a highest ranking of 3. I would have been a little bit surprised. It felt like the world was out to get Azeez at that point. If anything, though, I think there was a little bit of almost like a backlash against all of the Azeez Al-Shaair hatred, where a lot of people on the defensive side of the ball, especially, were saying, like, look, this guy plays the game the way it's supposed to be played. This guy is the embodiment of everything that DeMeco Ryans wants his linebackers to be when it comes to swarm traits and physicality, not to mention the veteran leadership and the football IQ and all of those things. That's exactly what we want. You watch Azeez Al-Shaair play, and other than a couple moments here and there, especially before the Trevor Lawrence incident, where he used to tiptoe up to the line and sometimes cross it when it came to, like, okay, just when do you gotta lay off a little bit sometimes. I think that's what you want your kids to play a linebacker like, and that's exactly what Azeez Al-Shaair does. The quotes. Okay, now this is where I'm going to get offended by some positive things, but I feel like these are a little bit like backhanded compliments almost. This is an NFL coordinator who says he's specialized by scheme a bit, but he's explosive and good in coverage. All right. It feels like being good in coverage and being explosive are scheme independent. I don't know if this guy means that he's helped out by playing around a bunch of other great players, because that's 100% a real thing with Mike linebackers. You don't necessarily have to cover as much ground. You don't. You get things funneled to you a little bit more. But you can say that about anybody who's in a good defense. I think for me, Azeez in pass coverage has been way better than I expected when they signed him. And I think he's been better since he's been here. I think really this last year you saw, man, the value of pre-snap recognition, playing the tendencies, playing your run pass keys. And, you might not trust him to run step for step with a tight end down the seam the whole way, but he gets into passing lanes, and sometimes he gets back to those spots a lot faster than his 40 time would suggest, just because he's got such a good bead on which play is coming. So it's really nice to see him get this. The other compliment that I just can't quite figure out, quote from an NFL personnel evaluator: he's the Dennis Rodman of linebackers. He gets in everyone's head. He can run all day and can play every down, unquote. All right. Dennis Rodman's a weird comparison. I'll take it because I think the grittiness and kind of thinking of, like, okay, if you had a basketball, okay, you know what? I'm starting to cotton to this a little bit. If you had a basketball team and you had to pick from Texans players, Azeez might not be the first guy you choose, but you can damn sure figure that either he or Will Anderson or somehow Kamari Lassiter, despite his size, would end up leading the team in rebounds just by sheer nastiness and football IQ. That, like, understanding the angles and everything, like, that's what Azeez does well when he's in pass coverage. That all works. The other quote here it's a stat that I thought was actually perfect was one, here it is. Azeez Al-Shaair's 9 passes defended last season were the most for a Texans player with 100 tackles since Brian Cushing had 10 in 2009. That's really interesting, because I think Cushing was another guy that physically didn't necessarily have the traits of somebody who was good in coverage, but when coordinators figured out exactly how to use him and what Cushing could and couldn't do in coverage, he did exactly what you needed him to do. I remember people were always surprised that his Pro Football Focus grades were higher than what the eyeball test might have said, but I think that's because they, like, for what they wanted him to do, he was really, really good at it. And it takes a good coordinator too, like DeMeco, to understand what the limitations of your players are. Moving back to cornerbacks. We only get one of them in the top 10. All right. So before you get disgruntled, I get it. One of these guys is going to be disrespected, but not to a huge degree. Derek Stingley, number 2 overall. Patrick Surtain was number 1 overall, and I'll talk about that in a second. His highest ranking was number 1. His lowest ranking was number 6. Pretty damn good consensus by the people who answered this survey that he's very much one of the best cornerbacks in the league. And I think when you look at a lot of rankings of cornerbacks right now around the league and in media, that's pretty much how it falls. Patrick Surtain and then Derek Stingley. Quote, his zone vision is outstanding. He can play man at a high level, but the way he sees the field and anticipates in zone is special. So sometimes, a zone cornerback is kind of a dirty phrase when it comes to, like, cornerbacks don't want to be known for their zone defense. The nice thing about the Texans is that they mix their looks up pretty consistently. I know they don't disguise a lot and all that stuff. We've seen all of those charts. But they play different coverages and mix up man and zone pretty healthily. They don't play as much man as the Broncos do. So Patrick Surtain is in a defense where they blitz a lot, puts a lot of pressure on your cornerbacks. So I think Patrick Surtain is going to get more credit than Derek just because he's put in that role more often. I think Stingley, if you switch the two, these two rankings might switch too. So I don't get overly disgruntled about Patrick Surtain being number 1 because A, all right, he's a really good cornerback. B, he's in a scheme where people are going to take more note of it because they put that much more pressure on Patrick Surtain. Stingley held opposing quarterbacks to a 46.9% completion rate on 64 targets. There was a 6-game stretch from weeks 8 through 13 last year where he allowed 5 catches for 57 yards on 19 targets. So in that stretch during those 6 games, he was allowing an average of 9.5 receiving yards per game, which is pretty damn good. If your cornerbacks are only allowing less than 10 receiving yards per game, hard to have a really good passing offense against the Texans defense. A quote from a veteran NFC coach said, elite feet and back to the ball instincts. If you throw a 50-50 ball, he's probably going to come up with it. And the quarterback will choose to throw some of those because the pass rush is so good. Yeah, again, the defensive backs complementing the defensive line and vice versa. You get some of those 50-50 balls where maybe the quarterback was trying to throw the perfect pass, but no, it's an underthrown football. And God help you if you try to back shoulder fade against Derek Stingley. Many a good and many a horrible quarterback have gone down trying to make that mistake. Tua Tagovailoa. Honorable mention here at 11th. They don't rank them, but Fowler kind of usually puts these in order of votes and points received. So Kamari Lassiter didn't make the top 10. He did finish 11th. A quote from an NFC offensive coach: really good ball skills, not the fastest, but ultra competitive, a little bit more size and speed, and he might be the best. Talking about the best cornerback. This is where it gets really interesting for me with Kamari Lassiter. I think that Kamari Lassiter has shown that, look, for one, the reported 40 time, that's kind of been debunked, and that was a big knock against him in the draft process. But I do think it's fair to say that there is an element of top-end speed compared to some of the guys that get drafted in the top 5 that is just maybe a beat slower than those guys. But the way he makes up for it, and I think this is what people are just, they're hesitant to believe in it, it's that he has freakishly good ability to diagnose when the ball is going to land, and his ability to break up passes at the catch point, even if he might be beat by a half step, is really, really good. But that's not one of the things that people traditionally think about when they think about effective cornerbacks. I was skeptical of it myself for a while, and now I've gotten to the point where now I might see if I see a go route to the guy that Kamari's covering, and maybe it looks like he's got a half step on Kamari, I don't worry about it anymore, because more times than not, Kamari's going to get his hands up between the receiver's arms at just the right moment and break that up. Think about that Chiefs game last year where the ball was a little bit underthrown, but I think a lot of cornerbacks might have allowed a touchdown reception, that deep ball over the middle. That's a dependable trait for me by now. I don't question it anymore. I think that Kamari just needs one more year, and people are going to regard him, at least a few ticks higher than they are in this poll right here. One of the other quotes from an NFC defensive coach: the best number 2 corner in the league. So he's right there. He's right there on the brink. Safeties. This gets interesting. Calen Bullock comes in at number 10 overall. He's the highest ranked Texan. He had the highest ranking anybody gave him was number 2 overall. And that echoes, I think, some of what I've heard from people around the league in terms of like he's kind of he's a little bit like Amen Thompson a couple years ago, where people were saying like, hey, did you guys notice like Amen Thompson's really good? and then all of a sudden he became the vogue choice for people to try to position themselves as ball knowers. Like, I'll tell you what, you got to watch out for this Amen Thompson kid. That's where I feel like Calen Bullock is right now. And a lot of people took note this last year. I think there are a lot of people that maybe haven't played the Texans in the past season that don't realize just how good Calen Bullock has become. Quote from an NFL coordinator says, he's probably an adequate to average tackler, but his range is elite. So I value that superpower. I'd rather you take the ball away and just be an adequate tackler than the other way around. I think part of it with his tackling, because his tackling did improve last year. I mean, there's like, he's not the physically most imposing guy, so I don't know if he's ever going to become an incredible tackler. But part of it with his tackling in his rookie year was the same thing that he had to work on as a rookie safety and pass coverage, which is a lot of it's about the angles and understanding exactly, you know, how to approach your tackles, how to use the sideline to your advantage. And he's gotten a lot better at that, both as a tackler and in pass coverage. The exciting thing about him this year is that for the first time, he's going to have a guy next to him consistently who's a veteran player, and that as long as Reed Blankenship stays healthy, not only does that make it easier for him to play in his role, but it should free them up to use that range a little bit more. And whether they're using him up in the box or whether they're disguising coverages a little bit where he can show up like he's in the box and then bail out at the snap, I think you're going to see a lot more from him this year, and he's going to be a third year in the NFL. He's much more of a genuine veteran player than you can put more on his plate. So a lot of you are asking, wait a second, A, did they classify Jalen Pitre as a safety? And B, did he make this list? They did classify him as a safety. He ends up in honorable mention, but with the 11th most votes. Quote from an NFC scout, he's a nickel but can play safety. Don't think he gets nearly enough credit. Would love to have him. I think this is the problem. It's that and this is what's going on with a lot of the ways that people classify and rank players now, is that, yeah, most teams are playing with 5 defensive backs on the field more than their base defense. Like it's much less common that a team goes out there and plays with just 4 defensive backs on the field than they do just in nickel or dime. So when Pitre comes in, you know, if you call him a slot corner, and I never liked it when they first made that move where they were calling him a slot corner. All right, he's not going to be as good as an actual cover slot corner as, say, when a guy like Cooper DeJean comes down and plays in the slot. He's a nickel linebacker in my mind, and that's what he is. So he's not a linebacker. He's not a slot corner. He's not a safety, but he's this star position player that can do whatever you need him to do based on the game plan. And he's incredibly good at it, and the Texans utilize him perfectly. I think hopefully if they just come into that nickel back, if they just started having nickel back as a role, I wouldn't even call him a nickel linebacker. I'll just call him the nickel back. He's the guy that comes in and either plays linebacker or slot corner or whatever you need in that defense. And he does a really, really good job of it. It's just that these guys, you know, kind of like I said with edge rusher, there's kind of a priming of your brain about like, okay, what am I voting on here? And a lot of people might not even be thinking of Jalen Pitre as a safety when they're voting on these safety lists, but he got some recognition. Those are your defensive players, and those are the vast majority of guys who made the top 10 or honorable mention in this list. When we go down to offense, pickings are a little bit slimmer. Nico Collins makes the list, as you would expect. Little bit lower than I'd like to see him, but I understand it. He ends up number 8 on this list. Nico Collins, by the way, over at FanDuel has an over-under on the season of 1,050.5 yards. I think with Nico, as it is every year, it's all about the health. And if he's healthy for 17 games, I would take that in a heartbeat. It's just a question of whether he can stay healthy for all 17 games. And I think that's probably what docked him in the rankings, that if he just stays healthy for a whole season, and if you're an executive filling out this list, and you're like, okay, I'm going to go look at the receiving yardage leaders and everything. Like, just it's simple mathematics. He's going to be higher if he stays healthy for 17 games. One personnel executive said this: combination of size, strength, speed, route running, hands, and ball skills, can make plays when contested, and is physical after the catch. I think that's a more underrated element of Nico's skill set, is his yards after the catch. 2 years ago, he finished as one of the top guys in the league in terms of yardage after catch. I don't know where he finished last year, but that physicality, that ability to break tackles and get extra yardage is huge. It'd be nice to see it, and I think he'd get more recognition for it if we could see it in the playoffs. Problem was, he only played one playoff game this year, and nobody was really thinking about the Texans passing game much in the playoffs in general. After that, there were some incidents, okay? There were some occurrences, and he leaves the Steelers game with a concussion, doesn't play in the Patriots game. I would almost look at this as an indicator of, man, if Nico Collins is able to stay healthy next year, I think he's in the top 5, and I think it also means really good things for the Texans offense. Let's get to the quarterback. Usually you should lead with quarterbacks, but I'm so tired of talking about CJ Stroud at this point. I just want to see actual football. CJ Stroud out playing tackle football, not in his underwear at OTAs or at minicamp. I just want to see that. I'd love to see him for 2 series in the first preseason game, and just let's get this thing rolling. Stroud only received 1 vote. And based on the tiers that Jeremy Fowler put, he might have been the 18th, 19th, or 20th ranked quarterback in this exercise. And look, it's not a huge surprise to me. There was one person that voted for him in the top 10. I think the biggest thing with Stroud right now, as I've talked about multiple times, is I think the entire league, including just NFL media, the people who break down film on the internet, and then NFL personnel themselves, I think a lot of people are just saying, all right, you know what? I need to see CJ Stroud surrounded by a competent offense. And most of all, that means a good offensive line that can run the football. And everything they did in the offseason this year was aligned with that goal in mind. Every single guy they brought in, other than wide receivers, is a guy who either excels in run blocking, or a guy like David Montgomery who isn't going to be a premier running back necessarily, but does that one thing, that physicality and short yardage down in the red zone that people really, really want and that I desperately want. And that's going to make him a better quarterback. We talked about his over-under on touchdowns earlier. And so much of that has to come down to the red zone. The thing about the red zone last year, Texans had the 18th most trips to the red zone. So they're just about averaging getting down into the red zone. They were 29th in red zone efficiency. So the percentage of time that they scored touchdowns, they were one of the worst in the league. If you just turn them into an average red zone efficiency offense last year, how many more touchdowns is that? I can go back and do that math. I'll do that for the next podcast. But it's a much better, and it's a much more effective and a much more potent offense. Is it the best offense in the league? No, but it's still a damn better offense than what they were when it came to that thing that I like as an analytically minded person. I like my team to score football points. Okay. I want points, and I prefer 6 points to 3. It's twice as many points plus the extra point on top of it, if you want to take that as a given. So that's where CJ Stroud finished this year. I don't look at it as an insult. I get it. I understand why people did what they did. I'd be more concerned about, like, how the hell did Jalen Hurts end up 17th on this list? I understand that part and the reasoning behind it, but man, for a guy I digress. Other offensive players. I mean, the only other offensive player who received votes in these various rankings was Dalton Schultz, who received votes but didn't finish in the top 10 or the honorable mention, so the top 15 vote getters. I think he's another guy that, getting down into the red zone, if you have a good rushing attack, if defenses have to respect the run, that's when you get those wide open tight end touchdowns, when a linebacker or a safety is just so dialed in on making the goal line stand, and he just misses the read because he's dialed in versus the run and forgets that he's supposed to cover the tight end or is a step late on it. That's where you see more red zone production out of Dalton Schultz, and I think that's where he ends up with a chance to get into the top 10 next year. If just that one little simple thing of the offensive line playing better and David Montgomery and Woody Marks doing what they need to do, that sets up a lot of touchdown opportunities for Dalton Schultz. He's going to produce. He's going to get receptions. He's going to get yardage. It's just a matter of red zone is what I think I really want to see out of Dalton Schultz. And even if he plays the exact same way he did last year, if those other things have improved, then he's got a good chance of just being way more productive down there. No votes for the running backs. I thought maybe David Montgomery would get one vote, but the same thing I said about Dalton Schultz goes for David Montgomery as well. David Montgomery, yes, he's part of a guy that hopefully in some of those short yardage situations, especially down in the red zone, that if you had him last year, maybe he would have gotten that extra 6 or 7 inches. This year, there's those elements, and then also hopefully running behind a better offensive line, especially better run blockers on the offense. Then he ends up with way more touchdowns than people are expecting right now. But he did not get any votes from these people in the top 10. Offensive tackles, no votes. Interior offensive line, no votes. Now, my longstanding philosophy, as it is for many others, is that you don't have to have 5 all-pro guys to have a really good offensive line. If you have 5 average guys, you can have a really competent offensive line. I don't know if it's the best offensive line in football or anything, but you know what usually happens when that happens. If you've got a good overall offensive line, then some of these other guys get raised up in the rankings. Be very curious to see if there's a chance for Ariante Ursary to elevate his level of play this year and get into this conversation. Because I thought he had a very promising rookie year. I think he was better in the second half of the season than he was in the first half, which you'd love to see that out of a rookie offensive lineman, and that's what he did. So his trajectory is good right now. He's just got to keep building on that, and I think he's got an opportunity. So there you have it. Hopefully by the time we do this exercise next year, there are way more offensive players on the list and just as many, if not more, defensive players. And I hope Jalen Pitre gets appropriately rated. And I think Calen Bullock's got a chance to take a really big step up in terms of estimation from people around the league this year. So if you haven't subscribed already, please do. Hit the subscribe button, like it, and leave a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. It helps more Texans fans find this little community of ours. And thanks to Believe for sponsoring the Believe in Texans podcast.